Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Atomy Brainwaves, our podcast on education for educators. Brainwaves is produced by our wonderful team here at Atomy. What is Atomy? It's an online teaching and learning platform for secondary education. We provide engaging, curriculum-specific video and text lessons for over 190 subjects, as well as matching quizzes and exam practice that can be used for both learning and formative assessment. We also provide powerful analytics that can help teachers diagnose how their students are progressing and zero in on who might need a little bit of extra help. Our goal is to help make life easier for our teachers, give them more time to work on the most important things, and ultimately help to generate better outcomes. If you want to find out more about Atomy, head over to our main site at getatomy.com and feel free to try it out for free. This week, I chatted to our resident teaching expert Sue Temlett on the subject of managing challenging behaviour. We discussed the myriad external and internal factors that can give rise to challenging behaviour in the classroom, what challenging behaviour looks like in an individual and collective sense, and unpacked the best and worst strategies for how to handle it. If that sounds like your kind of thing, don't hesitate to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you like to do your listening. And while you're at it, why not leave us a quick 5-star review? For now, give this episode a listen, and I hope you enjoy it.
Are you going to teach us anything?
What, you want me to teach you something? You want to learn something? All right. You got it!
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Atomy Brainwaves. I'm your host Simon, and today I'm joined by our resident teaching expert Sue. How are you doing, Sue?
What's up, Simon?
Not much, just enjoying the complete lack of relative freedom that we have here in Ireland in comparison with you guys in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, I booked a holiday.
Were telling me, yes, you were telling me off air before that it's pretty much back to normal.
No, I wasn't.
You guys,
not that bad.
Yeah, well, I suppose not quite that bad, but that was the message I was getting.
Yeah.
While we're
we're
much
being
under a lot
blessed
more
with
strictures.
Low numbers and restrictions easing.
Yes, unfortunately not the case here. We all have to stay on our best behaviour here in Ireland, which is
difficult
how I'm
for
going
the
to
Irish.
segue. Yes, but on the subject of behaviour, that's how I'm going to segue us very smoothly into today's central topic, which is managing challenging behaviour.
Good one.
Perhaps not the favoured aspect of teaching for many people out there, but if you are someone who has been a teacher for even an hour, I'm sure you know that this is, for better or worse, very much a very prevalent, very important aspect of the job. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, as we go along, the thrust of our conversation is going to be talking about, advice for teachers on strategies on how to handle managing challenging behavior. But, the best place to start, I think, is sort of to talk about the causes, for where challenging behavior comes from, how it manifests in students. So we'll start by talking about the external factors that give rise to challenging behavior in students. And I was hoping you could talk us through, what these might be, whether it's, a student's health, physical or mental, home factors, issues with interactions with others that they might have. What are these kind of key factors that give rise to behavioral issues in the classroom, and how can teachers recognize them?
Sure. I think it's true what you say, that it's such a behavior goes hand in hand with teaching, and good behavior, challenging behavior, you're going to get a range of it changing during the lesson every day. And it's, in some ways, it's part of what makes teaching such a rewarding job, and also such a varied job. I don't think I've ever had a day in teaching when I was like, well, that was boring. It's just, you're working with, particularly, obviously my experience is high school, but you're working with so many awesome individuals every day, and that's going to bring it's going to bring challenges as well as lots of rewards. So you do have to take the rough with the smooth. But yeah, there are many factors into what can be classed as, I guess, challenging behaviour. So let's take them. Let's have a think. I guess health was one that you mentioned. So things like not getting enough sleep is a very simple one. One that I experienced quite early on in one of my Australian schools was children who were playing too much video games, and actually what that impact had on their sort of brains, their attention, that kind of thing. So poor diet could be a cause of some significant behavioural issues. And I've seen that with my own 6-year-old. Like, there are 2 types of preservatives that are in bread that he cannot have because he turns into a psycho. And so, like, no kidding, he'll throw books at you. And he's the most beautiful, well-mannered little boy. But if he has preservative 282 or 202, he flips. And
Jekyll and Hyde situation with that bread.
Well, I mean, we just limit that now, but because that's in white bread, like, the cheaper the white bread, it's more likely to have that preservative in. But so if we go to, like, the like when you get sausage sizzle at Bunnings, if he has, like, bread like that, very shortly afterwards you're like, oh no, he's had white bread. And his behaviour is significantly changed. So things like that, factors of the diet, cutting out certain types of food colouring can be, particularly in younger children, like red food colouring can cause issues, and then on the opposite end of the scale, you might actually get, like kids who are very physical, too much, like lots of sport, lots of exercise, etc. Which means that at school, that's almost like their downtime. And so school's like their relaxing, switching off time.
Put the feet up.
Yeah, sort of thing. So you can get all spectrums, And then, of course, there's actually the diagnosed health issues like ADD, ADHD, things that would cause students to need an individual educational plan. Anything like that, obviously that's a significant diagnosed issue. And as a teacher, you need to be aware and differentiate around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean...
sure. And... Oh, no, sorry. Carry on.
Oh, I was going to say, there's... With the health issues, I don't think there's an easy fix for many of those. But yeah, I think... Yeah, I'll go on to maybe home in a minute, but say what you were going to say.
No, I was just gonna ask it, and it's kind of a thorny question in a way, because basically you've identified a lot of external factors there that can kind of cause these cause behavioral issues in the classroom, and obviously by the very nature, these external factors have their root in what's happening outside the classroom. Very often, in terms of what's happening at home. Be that diet or, sleep schedule, all this kind of thing. When such a factor has been identified, I guess from the teacher's perspective, to what extent would you say is it a teacher's responsibility to, in that scenario, talk to the parent and have what can be, I guess, a difficult conversation? Because, of course, it's not coming from a place of blame. It's coming from a place of, we all want what's best for this student. But I imagine it can be difficult to phrase if you're talking to a parent and you have to say something along the lines of your child is staying up too late playing video games, or your child is not eating particularly healthily, and that's having knock-on effects, and which can be a hard thing to phrase without it sounding like you're almost pointing a finger of blame.
Yeah, definitely.
Kind of jumping a little bit ahead here and going into the deep end, but in terms of handling that conversation, what do you think is an approach, a good approach that a teacher can take to make sure that conversation ends up being one that leads to positive, constructive change rather than potentially making the person on the other end, the parent, become defensive?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't even know as a teacher that you would be able to identify, say, poor diet, for example, as a factor. Things like, say, computer game playing, you might know that because of the kids talking about it. That particular example was identified to me by the parents asking me if I had any tips for getting their kid to stop playing, and I was like, not really. But I would. They are definitely tricky conversations to have, because you don't want parents to think that you're calling their parenting under the sort of spotlight, and that can be really exacerbated if there are difficult family circumstances or anything like that, where so no criticism or judgment here from us at all, but sometimes kids can react poorly if there's like broken homes, or they might be having issues with a sibling, or they've just moved house. There's lots of things that can kind of upset kids in the sort of home environment. But when I've had to do tricky conversations like that, my initial process is always to basically find out if that is an issue for the child across the school. So you do a little bit of, like, you refer it up to, say, your year advisor or whoever is in charge of that year group, who can reach out to other teachers and see whether or not that is the case for everybody. And if that is the case for everybody in a high school environment, you generally wouldn't have just the normal class teacher having that conversation. It's probably at year advisor level. It might even involve the school counsellor. And that's where they are particularly gifted, and it's their strength to have those challenging conversations with parents in a way that is caring and positioned to have the best outcome for the kids. So I do think it is time, if you're concerned about anything like that, to call in colleagues before you sort of shoot your mouth off, or maybe say something that is very hard to unpick, or you don't want to damage your relationship with a family. I think it's worth calling in the pros in that case, if you are worried about a challenging conversation or worried about something that you might have identified. If you've seen it, it's probably likely that other teachers have too. So, call on your colleagues and use the processes in school to get the best outcome.
Yeah, it's definitely sound advice, and being as thorough as you can be, and making sure that everything's handled as sensitively as possible. With, as you say, the pros is definitely much more likely to lead to a positive outcome than kind of diving right in yourself. I guess that's kind of the external factors, and I suppose even with the best teacher in the world at spotting and figuring out what's going on outside of the classroom and how that's impacting behavior, and then handling it really, really well, there's always going to be that lack of control that's involved there. At the end of the day, when the student's out of the classroom, there's only so much you can do to impact what's happening there. However, the other side of the equation, of course, is what's happening inside the classroom, which is very much the environment which the teacher is in control of. And I wanted to ask, first of all, before we get into strategies on how to maybe change things, I feel like an important thing for a teacher to do is to take a look at the internal factors and ask the potentially difficult but very important question of, is there something with how I'm running my classroom that is maybe, facilitating challenging behavior, or setting the conditions, or, even possibly confrontational in some regard, that's kind of giving rise to some pushback from students that, maybe I need to address, which can be a difficult thing. And you obviously need to walk a careful line here, because, on the one hand, you don't want to say, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong, it's all the students. On the other hand, if you're a teacher, you don't want to become obsessed and worry about, God, I'm doing all these things wrong and I need to change everything because I'm the problem.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult middle ground to find, but, I guess, first of all, what are some potential internal factors that maybe within a classroom the teacher can change to improve the situation, to change the environment so it doesn't encourage challenging behavior, and how might a teacher identify those issues if they are at play in his or her classroom?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between, like, you've got to be in control, you've got to have authority, but you don't necessarily need to be authoritarian. Like there's a difference between expecting that you will just be respected because you're a teacher, and like the days of the cane are gone. Teaching is a very relational, a very relational thing. But yeah, I think some of the things that I've done along the years of teaching is, and encourage new teachers to do, is that you've got to own your room. Like, you're probably too young for this, but there was a line in Dirty Dancing, which is a film, Patrick Swayze film. I really liked.
I'm kind of familiar. Yeah. Nobody puts baby in the corner.
Okay. Well, it's kind of like that. It was like, you don't come into my dance space, I don't come into your dance space, etc. So I always sort of use that as a kind of like thought process, in that this is my room. I'm inviting you into my room, and it might be that you've got multiple rooms during the day, but they are your room. You own that room. This is my space, and you are coming into my space, and you are welcome for sure, but there are some rules in my space. And those rules are, for me, I always have a seating plan for my kids. And I start every year off by lining up outside the classroom and showing them where they're going to sit in my space. Okay. Now, I might relax that as the year goes on, because, like, you get to know the kids, you get to know so-and-so likes, working with that person, etc. But basically they have to, I guess, earn that. They don't start with that, So you put them into a seating plan. It establishes that this is your space. And then some things like, I've known teachers steer away from group work if they've got challenging kids. And in fact, what that actually does, by kind of not varying, the way that you teach or your classroom environment or anything like that, you may actually be setting yourself up for lessons that are not as engaging as they could be. So don't sort of do a one-size-fits-all delivery, because that can often be the cause of poor behaviour, where it might be too easy, where it might be too hard. I think every teacher dreads being called that they're boring, but, kids are incredibly stimulated in lots of areas of their lives now, and you do have to be an interesting teacher. So what can you do that makes your teaching interesting, makes them engaged in the learning? It is something that you need to consider. Now, I've always had sweet spots in the classroom. So this doesn't always work. Like if a kid is, you need to check kids' IEPs if they have one. And often with an IEP, it might say that they've got to sit at the front of the class. But if that is not a factor, a lot of teachers will put challenging students at the front of the class because they think, okay, they're right there, right where I want them. But what you're actually doing then is like just almost operating right next to that person all the time. It might be actually cause more abrasion than you want. So I've had this policy where I put my most challenging students in the back two corners, which might sound frightening to some teachers because they're like, oh, they're way away and whatever. But what you often find with challenging students is they like to turn around in their seats. So if you do have classrooms that are in rows, which is unfortunately still mainly happens in most schools at the moment, they might be sat in twos or rows of four or whatever, but it's often still rows, maybe groups, but often rows in the places that I've been in. So I put them in the back two corners, and then they've actually lost the audience as such. They can't turn around and be like the class clown, or other people who are working are facing the board or facing where the teaching's happening, and that takes away, I guess, some of the power in the classroom. So don't be afraid to kind of, try different setups with your rooms, try different setups, move them every two lessons if you need to until you get what works right for you. And I think another kind of key factor is to really know your students. Like a challenging student, you still need to know them just as much as a student who's completely pliant and, like a joy to teach, for example. You've got to know that class so that, the dynamics of that class, the dynamics of the different students, the motivations of them, etc., are all something that you can call to mind straight away as you're kind of managing the unfolding dynamics in the classroom on a day-to-day basis.
Hey folks, hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we've got plenty more to come after this quick break. Here at Atomy Brainwaves, we're all about education, and not just for students, for ourselves too. We would love to hear from you, whether that's feedback on one of our episodes or a question you'd like to see answered by one of our guests or by Sue. So, if you've got a comment or a question, don't hesitate to email us at brainwaves@getatomy.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, let's get back to it. Yeah, it's a really important point and almost sounds obvious, but it is worth kind of hammering home this idea of knowing your students, knowing each of them individually, knowing them well. It can almost be even said that you need to know the students whose behavior can be challenging even more so, because to kind of get that better understanding. Also, as I'm kind of just hearing about your kind of just that specific idea of rearranging the room as someone who, as much as I hate to say it, in some of my younger years was very much guilty of being branded the class clown on a couple of occasions. I think you're absolutely right. I'm thinking back to some occasions where being moved to the front of the class, I'd only fueled my attention seeking in turning around at any opportunity. Just, there'll always be a moment when the teacher had to turn around to the blackboard or something. That was my chance to turn around.
And you're permanently being told, Simon, face the front. And so to avoid that, you just have you at the back and there's nowhere to turn
and there's
to.
No one to turn around to. And, my desperate efforts to try and pull a bit or a performance at the back, it just wasn't happening. Everyone's back was to me. I didn't have the crowd. So, it's a solid advice. I'm going to get us a little bit more specific here for a moment because I'm just going to try and zero in on what, we've talked about the factors, kind of the general broader ideas with relation to challenging behavior, but just for the purposes, before we get into how to deal with these individual things, I wanted you to kind of run us through what might be some of the most common manifestations of challenging behavior in the classroom. So what, it specifically looks like in the room. And I mean that, first of all, on an individual level, what, one particular student, how he or she might act out, but also in a collective sense, how, the group element of challenging behavior can manifest itself as well. Yes, I can hear the trepidation in your voice, and no doubt past experiences coming to mind. Yeah. But, so could you talk us through what these kind of, I guess, for want of a better term, classic examples, first of all in an individual, then a collective sense, look like?
Yeah, I think in many ways individual behaviour is actually easier to deal with than a real collaborative class effort to derail teaching as such. Individual behaviour that manifests, it depends on what's going on, but it can manifest in defiance, like a poor attitude, angry, volatile. It can be something that you don't know from day to day what that student's going to present like. I guess defiance is the biggest one within an individual behaviour that's just like, I'm not doing that, and then teachers can feel very much like with nowhere to go. But even it's funny, I the examples of challenging behaviour that have been more sort of that defiance or angry or that kind of thing, from my experience, have often been boys. But then the sort of sullenness and more withdrawn and, you know, like roll your eyes or tut at you or refuse to engage and that sort of thing has often been a very typical kind of girl challenging behaviour. You know, so they might not be quite as, or in my experience, they haven't been quite as angry or volatile, but they can hold a grudge a lot worse than boys. So, so I think gender does come into different behaviours, and then the individual sense, I guess, that kind of list I just went through, I guess, is what I would class as typical. And then the collective, what can we expect to see, moving away from what kind of one individual boy or girl might do to disrupt the classroom? I guess the even more dreaded scenario of when there's a group, either a small group within the classroom, or God forbid, the entire class. How does that manifest itself? So that's funny. It's often whole class poor behaviour is often associated with the sort of lower years of high school, and then it seems like maturity kicks in at different levels, and then you begin to have odd collections of behaviour in the senior years. So I think that I've had several challenging like year 8 classes and year 9 classes. Year 7's generally quite compliant because, you know, they've just started at high school and, you know, fresh starts and that sort of stuff. But by year 8 and 9, they're sort of like, they're not lost years as such, but they're not like I've kicked off school, or in year 10 where I'm kind of growing into that more senior kind of space. That being said, I've had some quite challenging year 10 classes as well. But the lower years, the sort of collective sense often manifests itself in just a huge kind of class immaturity, where it's sort of giggling, or you know, you might get several who are maybe defiant or have a really poor work attitude, and they set the whole class off. And then it's really hard to bring the whole class back together. And it can seem sort of like you're, you know, trying to control a circus or something with different people popping out of their box at different times. And it can be flat out exhausting after an hour of a very high energy class like that. And I think the way that you have to meet that is with energy as well. You know, like you've got to think, okay, they are not a class that chalk and talk is going to work for. You know, that's not going to work for those. So what happens with that younger year group that is going to change that sort of energy and divert it into something productive rather than something negative? But interesting when you've got a whole class on the go.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Well, I haven't been on your side of the.
It sounds like you may have been in the classes.
I have. Hey, well, sorry. Look, let me clarify even further. I'm not at all saying I was the number one villain. By no stretch of the imagination. I had my moments, as many do through the years. Yeah. But I guess, you know, you've touched on, in kind of going through a few of those examples there, what can be done to kind of control that situation. But I'm gonna zero in again on kind of best case strategies, because, you know, obviously that's the thrust of why we're here. But just within the context of some of those examples that you've given and how they manifest themselves, we'll start again with the individual, and then we can get to the collective after that. But, you know, some of the individual problems that you've outlined, maybe that face of that volatility or that sullenness, you know, in that scenario, what advice would you give to a teacher? What's the best thing they can do in that moment to, first of all, in that moment, but then second of all, and maybe even more importantly, as an ongoing thing in terms of the relationship with that student, what's the best thing that a teacher can do to handle that situation?
I've got loads here. Initially, stay calm.
It's a long list.
You got to stay calm. You're the adult in the situation, so always stay calm. I'm a big believer in giving student choices. So I think if you back a kid into a corner, even if it is like you say, are you defying this instruction? And they get them to name the behaviour or call out what it is that they are making a choice about, and then present them with, if you continue to do this, A is going to happen. If you can bring this back in line, B is going to happen. What is your choice, A or B? I think the more that you back them into a corner, particularly with defiance, the more defiant they're going to get, and then it becomes like a massive issue. So I think in many ways, behaviour in schools is not black and white. Like it's just not. Although like a lot of behaviour policies are, like if they do this or if you get presented with this behaviour, it's level 1 or level 2 or, and it doesn't, you have to kind of find a medium within that works. Give you, for instance, like you might have a student, and I've actually had this, a student who, was refusing to come to school. And then did come to school, but came to school unshaven. So, the person who was in charge of the uniform in the school was like standing there making this kid shave. Whereas, is that actually what you need to do right now? Like welcoming them to school and saying, yeah, you're here, you made it, great. Or is it like you got to stick to the rules? So... Yes, unfortunately, you do have to, know the situation and know the students in order to make a kind of medium kind of call and things like that. But yeah, I find, I think a dose of reality is also good. Like you are not, just as in the same as we don't get on with every person in the world, you are not going to crack every kid. It's great when you do and you have that rapport. But you're not going to crack every kid. And what you will generally find is that if a kid isn't working for you, there's probably one teacher at least in the school that they are working for, and that they do have a good relationship with. So we used to do a thing in the UK that was called a Pupil Pursuit, where, if it was a particularly challenging student, you could actually follow them around for a day. They didn't know that you were following them, they just follow in the class as such, but you could actually go to the lessons for the day. And what I've done this myself in the first year of teaching, and one of the kids I struggled with the most, I watched him in a D&T class, and he was like a different kid. And it was because he was able to, get up, use his hands, walk around, be in a totally creative environment and that. And then in my classroom, he was stuck on a chair doing English. So you need to work out, what can you do to meet their strengths and to meet them at their level in terms of ongoing, and you can't do that every lesson, but at least if you pepper their experience with elements of that, you're going to gradually start to improve that relationship, And again, you're the adult, you're the one responsible for improving the relationship in many ways. These are undeveloped prefrontal cortexes in kids. So
the onus is on you, the teacher, as much as maybe you.
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, and sometimes it's a case of ignoring things. Do you want to, it's like parenting, picking your battles. Do you want to fight every single battle? In my first year of teaching in the UK, it was a pretty rough school. And the year 11 GCSE that I inherited that year, they had come from a year of supply teachers, and they really didn't care about their GCSE. So my head of department told me to literally split the class and say those who wanted to work could come to the front, and those who just wanted to sit and hang out could do so at the back, but they had to just be quiet. That's fine. I'm not going to bother with you. I'm just going to bother with those who want to learn. And so I was like, okay, let's do
somewhat
this.
Radical
Wasn't
approach,
my teaching dream, but so I did. I made the front fun, engaging. We did different activities, but I didn't bother with the back. And over about 3 or 4 weeks, more and more students, when they came in, just quietly sat at the front. Like I didn't make a big deal of, so-and-so, you're not at the back today. How wonderful. They just picked their spot. And by the end of the sort of social experiment, I guess, we had 3 kids who were left at the back. And they had lost the audience of the rest because they were on board. And it hadn't been a battle every lesson. It had just been like, this is the way it is. And, you know, I'm going to ignore that. And yeah, it was a interesting experience, but it got there in the end.
But yeah, but it really, I mean, it like a lot of these things, it can kind of, it's important to look at it in that kind of longer term perspective, because, okay, you look at it just within the context of the first class where you say, okay, half of you who want to learn come to the front, the other half go to the back. If you just look at it like that, it's very easy to say, well, that of course is not the right way to do this. You're leaving half of the class out in the cold. But it's an ongoing situation. Do you know what I mean? And as your example outlines, these kind of approaches over time it's how they it's what they turn into. It's how they develop into a more positive situation. And what really comes across is the flexibility of, you know, even that example, or even some of the other ones you gave, for instance, about the unshaven kid who came in, you know, having that flexibility to see, you know, beyond the immediate of, oh, you shouldn't be doing this because the rules say that you can't. Having the flexibility to have that give and take, and sort of what that will mean, the positive implications of that going forward in the relationship with the student.
Yeah. I mean, that head of department, I'm not recommending everyone goes and does that. My head of department there was particularly creative in that school. Like, I remember her once asking a kid to leave her class, and he refused to leave. So she took the whole of the class somewhere else and left him sat in the room. In
a way, a different kind of stubbornness almost.
Yes,
in its own way. But it's a creative solution.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the other thing in dealing with, you know, like we sort of said about class behaviour as well, particularly if you're a listener who is a new teacher, or in your first few years of teaching, new teachers or teachers new to a school as well, like when you've changed schools, often see it as a sign of weakness to actually ask for help of the head of departments or the year advisors, or, you know, the deputy or anything. Like it's they should be okay, and they're not, but they feel like they should be, and so they sort of hide away, and, you know, it grinds them down and wears them down, and that, you know. So I think it's fine to acknowledge that, you know, there are challenging kids in every school. There are going to be personality clashes and things like that. It's just the fact of being human. But know when to get help. You know when to use the school systems and to call someone in to assist you, or that sort of thing, before it becomes too much. And yeah, I guess never ever get into some sort of argument that you can't back down from, or, you know, that sort of stuff. But yeah, quite calmly, you know, even after the lesson, then go and get help or approach somebody to give you some support, you know. And I guess my final tip on that, sorry.
Yes, fire away.
I knew a teacher at a school, I think I've mentioned her before, who worked for 40 years, retired when I left this particular school. But she always had the low ability, difficult classes. Like, and that's not to say that all difficult classes are lower ability, but she always had, like, the standard English group, often made all of boys who just didn't want to do English. And she got them through English. But you would often find her out on the sport field, like going to watch them, and she would meet them on their turf and kind of find ways of connecting with them that wasn't over a novel, you know, like just find ways of, just showing them that you care about them as a person, not work related as such, no. So I think, back to the relationship aspect, but trying to find ways of connection are really important.
Yeah, and, you know, as we've been saying throughout, at the end of the day, it is a human relationship, you know, whether that be the one-on-one with an individual student or the one-to group, which I think needs to be, as long as that's at the center of what you do, as opposed to kind of the rules and the strictures of the system being at the center. You know, there's far more potential for positive improvements. And also, you know, what should be borne in mind here, and ties into what we're talking about in terms of flexibility, is that as much as these are, you know, great examples and they have worked for either yourself or for somebody else who you're talking about, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to work for everyone. You know, for every class that is going to take to what you were describing about being split and then coming forward, there are others where the opposite might happen, where students who are engaged might end up moving towards the back. So, you know, another important aspect in all of this is going to be the trial and error element of it. And I'm sure that's something that comes with experience too. You know, the longer you have been a teacher, the more classes you've dealt with, the more you're going to be able to recognize certain types of individuals, certain types of groups, what works and what doesn't. But I guess with that idea of what doesn't, it's the last thing I'm going to ask you about, possibly a bit of a negative note to close out our discussion on, but it warrant mention, is kind of the don'ts, because you know, there are some I guess classic mistakes that unfortunately a lot of teachers do make when it comes to dealing with the classroom, dealing with challenging behavior, that have the exact opposite effect of what they're trying to achieve. So I think it might be worth our while, you know, talking a little bit about those, you know, what they are, why they are to be avoided, and I guess, to put a positive spin on it, you know, alternatives to them, how some, you know, you can shift a certain approach just a little to make it go from being a negative one to a positive one. So so what are the don'ts when it comes to managing challenging behavior?
Well, I think like I said, don't leave the student with nowhere to go. Like, make sure that you offer choices and consider consequences to the choices. So I think that's probably one of the biggest for me. That's a don't. A huge don't is don't public shame them. You know, just imagine what you would feel like, you know, in the employment space or whatever, if you're publicly shamed. It's the same, you know. So in public shaming, embarrassing in front of peers, that kind of thing, is going to backfire and probably leave quite lasting negativity. If you can, and this is something that is hard to sort of remember, you need to refer to the behaviour rather than actually referring to the child. So, you know, you don't refer to a child as bad or naughty. It's the behaviour that that you're referring to, so that you're not sort of labelling the child and they grow up with a, you know, sort of I'm a bad person, or, you know, I can't behave kind of thing. So it has to be the behaviour that you call out rather than the child. And I think if you've got like an older kid particularly and they're argumentative, it's even if you're just new out of teaching, you know, you might be in early 20s and you might have siblings at the same sort of age as a 17, 18-year-old, you know. But do not get into an argument with them. You know, it's you have to be the adult, and you can't. It's not a slanging match or a tit for tat. You've got to be in control. You know, and I think as much as you can as well, get them away from their audience. So, you know, hold on till after class and address the behaviour. They're not asked to see them at recess, or I don't know, whatever that doesn't. You know, let them seem like they have got that kind of power in front of the audience, you know. And then one of the last ones is hard, and I do know teachers who've done this, and I have never done this myself, but try to not show emotion in front of them. Like, of course you're going to be smiley and happy and that kind of thing, but if you can avoid sort of breaking down into tears in front of a class, you know, no matter how challenging they are, or, you know, if you get super angry, that's still showing an emotion. So try and keep that sort of very raw side of yourself to the staff room, you know, if you can, because you know, you don't want an example where you feel embarrassed to go back the next day. or, you know, they don't know what to do because Miss ran out crying, you know, that sort of stuff. It's like I've seen it happen, and I know of colleagues that's happened to, but I think it's never been something that they've thought, yeah, that was a great move.
So glad that I burst into tears. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and it's impossible sometimes, you know, but if you can kind of hold that together, deep breaths, write very long sentences on the board until you just gather yourself, whatever you need to do, you know, take the next day off if you need to, if you just need to regroup. But yeah, I think you're right in that it comes with, like, you get more resilient and you get more of a bank of tips and tricks to work with different students and different classes and scenarios. But it's almost like you have to go through the difficulty to get that, you know, to get that experience. So, yeah. Yeah,
and what we should stress as well is that, you know, if you have been in that situation, you have burst into tears or you have lost your temper, you know, we're not sitting here to say, oh, you should feel ashamed or you should feel embarrassed or whatever, because at the end, teachers are people, and these things are going to happen. But the point is more so that, you know, even if that has happened, look at how you felt afterwards, look at the aftermath, I guess, and sort of learn from that experience. And, you know, as much as we're saying it is a human relationship, because it is, and that's super important, it's also a professional relationship in the classroom, you know, and it's maintaining that professionalism, I guess, is what that comes down to, and that authority that you're talking about, you know, it's not authoritarian, but it is authority. And to tie it back into what you said right at the top, and I guess keeping a lid on, as hard as it can be. And I liked how you said save it for the staff room, because I'm sure it's definitely a safe space to let all of those emotions out. But keeping a lid on it as much as you can and staying composed will really make a big difference for the dynamic within the classroom and sort of maintaining that. So very, very, very good advice on how to manage challenging behavior, and that's unfortunately all we have time for on that topic today. However, as always, we're going to round out with Sue's hot tip for the week. Could be a little bit of advice gleaned from your own teaching days, can be a little anecdote from your teaching days as well. Doesn't have to be that serious, can be fun, funny, whatever, up to you. Sue, what is your hot tip for this week?
I'm going to stay on topic, actually, because there's one thing I wanted to say that I haven't said, which is actually a hot tip. But it is that you need to approach each lesson with each kid as a fresh start every class. So every day, you know, like I often greet the kids at the door, and, you know, they walk through regardless of sullenness or whatever that you might be met with, you know, a bright smile and then good morning, great to see you. You know, you don't have to make a big deal out of the particularly challenging kid, you know, just say the same welcome to everybody. Don't stand there and go, I'm hoping you behave better today, you know, because instantly you're going to get, you know, that kind of like you've gone in bearing a grudge or whatever. So yeah, fresh start every class, every day. Doesn't mean you're a pushover, but it does mean that you are, you know, pleased to see the kids that you are teaching, you know. And so that would be my hot tip.
It certainly is a hot tip, and let me say it's something you bring not just to classrooms in your past experience, but something you bring to the podcast. You know, always coming in with a smile on your face, not holding any grudges against me for the whatever technical issues that I've brought to the table from the previous episodes. So, you know, you're practicing what you preach, and I very much appreciate that.
No dramas.
So that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much, Sue, for offering your wisdom. Thanks everybody for listening. If you want to hear any more episodes, you can find them on whatever platform you're listening to this on. If you want to check us out at our main site, you can find us at getatomy.com. For the time being, it's going to be goodbye from Sue.
Goodbye, everyone.
And goodbye from me. See ya.
See ya.